Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fourth in our series of online panel discussions, Conversations on Glass by Apice, which is taking place as part of the fourth edition of the Venice Glass Week, the international festival dedicated to the art of glass that's taking place here in Venice and Murano from the 5th to the 13th of September. The title of today's conversation is Making Glass Matter in Museums. My name's Camilla Purden, and I work as the festival coordinator of the Venice Glass Week, which is organized by 5 of Venice's most important prestigious organizations and institutions connected to the art of glass. They are the Fondazione Giorgio Cini with Le Stanze del Vetro, the Fondazione Musei Civici di Venezia, the Consorzio Promovetro Murano, the Istituto Veneto di Scienze, Lettere ed Arti, and the Comune di Venezia. This year, for the first time, we're really happy to be presenting a series of online panel discussions as part of the festival, Conversations on Glass by Apice, which is one of the most prestigious transportation companies for works of art and especially works of glass. They are responsible for the display, handling and transportation of works of glass for many of the exhibitions that are taking place here in Venice as part of the Glass Week, not least the magnificent show at Le Stanze del Vetro, Venice and American Studio Glass. So every day during the festival, we will be presenting daily discussions on various topics relating to different aspects of the glass world, including leading figures from the world of glass. The conversations will take place in English because we really want to provide an aspect of the festival this year, especially for those who may not be able to get to Venice this year due to problems with international travel. So we really hope that you enjoy these from wherever you are in the world, or indeed, of course, if you're in Venice. We are streaming live today on YouTube, and you're very welcome if you're watching during the live stream to ask questions. You can put those in the chat section of the YouTube channel that you're watching. We will relay those to our moderator, and then at the end of the conversation, the questions will be posed to the speakers. So we warmly invite you to put questions to the speakers. As I mentioned, today's conversation is titled Making Glass Matter in Museums, which is involving a genuinely superb panel of speakers, and we're so grateful to you all for joining us from your various institutions around the world. The conversation is going to be moderated by Thomas Marks. Tom is the editor and publisher of Apollo, which, as I'm sure most of you will know, is one of the world's most prestigious art magazines, founded in 1925, renowned for its outstanding and authoritative writing about art, whatever the field or focus. And they always have amazing access to leading artists, collectors, and cultural leaders. It's certainly my favorite art magazine, and it's always a treat when it arrives in the post, even out here in Italy. Since becoming editor in 2013, Tom has also relaunched the Apollo website, which is a forum for daily art news, comment and reviews. And he also established the very forward-looking Apollo Under 40, which is a publication celebrating talented young people in the art world. He's a trustee of Art UK, a cultural education charity that exists to open up the UK's public art collections to global audiences through digitalization and storytelling. And he's a big Venice fan too. We saw each other not so long ago out here for a post-lockdown spritz, which was definitely long overdue. So thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today. Before I hand over to you, I'm just going to introduce also our speakers. So first of all, we're joined by Carol White, who is the president and executive director of the Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York. Carol became the executive director of the museum in 2011, and she served as the curator of the Ancient and Islamic Glass Department from 2011 to 2017. She's been president and executive director of the museum since 2015 and is now responsible for an oversight of all museum activities. Carol's a specialist in ancient glass and has curated or co-curated innumerable exhibitions in this area. In 2017, she was appointed to a US State Department advisory post on the Cultural Property Advisory Committee by former President Barack Obama. She's a member of the Association of Art Museum Directors, as well as a member of the Board of Trustees on the American Alliance of Museums and the International Association for the History of Glass. And actually in 2018, she gave a conference as part of the Venice Glass Week 2018 at the Carrère Museum. And we really hope it won't be too long before she's back to give another conference or attend in person, but obviously delighted, Carol, that you're able to join us here today online. Then we have Reinhold Franz, who is an art historian and the curator of the glass and ceramics collection at MAC, the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, where he's also responsible for the cross-collection coordination and EU projects, provenance research and restitution. He's been working at the museum since 1992 in various roles, including deputy head of the library and works on paper collection. He's been the curator of numerous exhibitions, including The Glass of the Architects, Vienna, 1900 to 1937, and 300 Years of the Vienna Porcelain Manufacture, as well as the co-curator of other shows such as Handicraft, Traditional Skills in the Digital Age. He's written and contributed to many publications and symposia. He's been an assistant professor at the Vienna University and the University of Applied Arts, Vienna, chair of the International Committee of the Decorative Arts and Design, and head of the Austrian Art Historians Association. And since 2019, Reinhold has been the craft ambassador, Vienna, for the Michelangelo Foundation and the Homo Faber Guide, which was the remarkable exhibition that took place on San Giorgio Maggiore last year, and which we very much hope will return next year. And then finally, we're joined by Caroline Mccaffrey Howarth, who is curator of the 17th and 18th century ceramics and glass department of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Caroline is an art historian who specializes in European decorative arts, material culture, and the histories of collection. Originally from rural Ireland, Caroline grew up close to the Balique porcelain factory, where she discovered her love of ceramics. And after gaining her PhD in art history, which focused on the history of collecting Sèvres porcelain after the French Revolution, Caroline has lectured widely for various universities, including University of Leeds, the Royal College of Art, and the University of Buckingham, where she ran their French Decorative Art MA in partnership with the Wallace Collection. As I said, she's now the 17th and 18th century curator of ceramics and glass at the V&A and lecturer in the History of Design Masters with the V&A Museum and the College of Art. So as I said, an incredibly interesting and prestigious panel that we've got today, and we're so looking forward to hearing from all of you in just a few moments. But before I hand over to Tom, I'd just like to pass over to Melania Granzo, who is an exhibition manager for Apice, who, as I mentioned before, is our sponsor this afternoon. So Melania, maybe I think you'd just like to say a few words.
Sure. Okay, I just want to underline that in Venice, glass, as you all know, is a symbol of this city. And being Apice, a fine art transportation agency, which is located in Venice and make transport of art, it was natural to follow and to support the Venice Glass Week. And Apice did this from the very beginning. Now, we know that Murano and its furnace is, we can say, the heart of glass, because from the very beginning, a lot of international artists, started from Italian artists, were there, and they created their masterpieces inside those important furnaces. And not only they stay in Italy, because if we think of, for instance, Lino Tagliapietra, he went to United States, he lived there, and he brought all his skill, his experience to United States. A maestro del vetro, master of glass, going to United States, where other maestri del vetro were born. And when we think of glass of Murano, Venice, we think of these international artists doing wonderful pieces of art, such as vases, sculptures, chandeliers. So we are thinking of Seguso, Venini, Laura de Santillana, Alessandro de Santillana, Ciuli, Thomas Stearns, a lot of artists. But in the end, I even wanted to underline that in Murano, there is another branch of this wonderful art, the glass jewelry, which is really important, since a lot of people are even behind a glass necklace, bracelets, and earrings, and everything like for the other pieces of art starts from the drawing, the furnace, and then there are so many people, and we are learning this because the Danish Glass Week is even underlining the importance of the artisan. There are laboratories made very well, very nice to follow. So Murano and Venice. Well, you know that this year, but not only this year, even from last autumn for Venice, it was a really difficult time, hard times in the real sense of the word, because of the acqua alta phenomenon, which created a lot of problem to these beautiful islands and to the islands around. So Apice thought that this year was very important to be even more dynamic, thus trying to recommend and support these glass conversations, which are really important to know this fragile but important material, but even to improve the glass manufacturing. So even yesterday, Apice had the opportunity of explaining our part of job, the safe packaging of an important piece of art, of glass, and so how we can pack and transport it all over the world in safety, the importance of how to exhibit even these pieces of art. And Apice really wants to thank all people who believed the Venice Glass Week was possible, despite the pandemic. So the organizers, COVID-19 made everything very difficult for all the organizers, very demanding. All the artists taking part in this, all the lenders who gave their beautiful pieces to such exhibitions, as you mentioned, Stanze del Vetro, Fondazione Cini, and a real thank to people now online listening to this wonderful conversation on glass, because in the end, all this can testify that glass really matters, is important for all of us. So thank you all, and let's start to listen to this new conversation, which I think will be so interesting, like all the others before it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melania. That was wonderful. So yes, Thomas, I'll hand over to you now to kickstart the conversation with our speakers. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Camilla, and thank you for inviting me to chair this. I'm really delighted that Venice Glass Week is up and running this year, even though I'm sure all of the speakers would probably rather be in Venice than sitting in our home offices and other offices. I thought the topic suggested for this particular panel discussion was a fascinating one. I'm a bit of a glass lover, can we say a vetrophile or something like that? And many is the museum in which I've drifted down a corridor on the top floor or around some corner of an old building to hunt down perhaps a slightly dusty cabinet of American studio glass, or of Bohemian glassware, or of Japanese glass, you name it. I've often thought that there is something to speak about here in terms of the role of glass in museums and the role of glass museums themselves. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be thinking about what are the particular roles of that material in the museum. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges of displaying glass, but in particular, I really want to dwell on and explore some of the real challenges, curatorial challenges for thinking about how process and the complex process of glass making might relate to the very pristine image of many glass objects when they're displayed in museums, how perhaps some of the social histories of glass might come to the fore in new interpretations of the material. I'm going to go straight in though now. I've asked our speakers to provide a couple of images each, one or two images, just to give us, as it were, a jumping off point on this vast topic. So if I can ask Eleanor to upload the images, I'm then going to ask Carol just to speak for 1 or 2 minutes about the images she's chosen and how they relate to this topic.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate today. It's a real honor to be with you. And I also want to extend my sincere thanks to Apice, who was our partner in transporting our objects to La Stanza del Vetro for the important exhibition on Americans in Venice that is on view there. So thank you, Melania. The slides, or the images, slides, I'm dating myself. The images that I selected to share today are really about contemporary art. The Corning Museum of Glass is devoted solely to that subject matter. So Tom, you would encounter glass the moment you walk through the door when you come to visit in Corning. And our collection really spans millennia, from the second millennium BC all the way to the current year. And last year we mounted a very important exhibition called New Glass Now, which was a snapshot of what artists working in glass today are doing with the material. And it was really designed to disabuse our guests, if you will, from the notion that all glass is a vessel sitting on a table. In the left, you can see Deb Chiresco's Meat Chandelier. Deb is a gay artist who trained in Venice, so knows Venetian technique very well, but turned that technique up on its head to create a chandelier that is a string of sausages hanging from that supporting mechanism. And this show was really designed to capture all aspects of glass making, whether it's the object, whether it's a sculpture, or whether it's captured in other material as well. So if you go to the next slide, we had video. Glass artists are creating video work. They are doing performance art. They are doing everything that other contemporary artists are doing. And so one of our goals with exhibitions like this is to really challenge our visitors to understand that contemporary art in glass is contemporary art. And encountering that kind of material within the context of our museum and then being able to relate it to the more historical glass that we have in the collection creates this continuum of expression through the material. For me, glass is an amazing material that has many, many different applications and properties that we continue to discover and manipulate. And the work that artists historically and in a contemporary fashion are doing in glass right now is just incredible. So I'm going to stop there because I'm sure we'll return to this subject later on. But I'm delighted to be here, as I said, and we cover the whole expanse of man-made glass. So I can talk about the past, I can talk about the present. And Tom, I'm a glass addict. So that's how I describe myself.
Thank you, Carol. That's a great introduction to the Corning and the mission of the Corning as well. And I'd love to talk a bit more. There's something very suggestive in what you said about artists, I think, glass artists working in performance art, insofar as perhaps one thing we might come to later on when we think about process is how far the making of glass is itself or has become a type of performance art in some ways. I'm going to move on to Reinhardt's slides, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and grazie Melania Granzo for sponsoring this. We worked together, your firm Apice and me, for the exhibition that I'm showing here in these two slides that I've chosen. They are views of the 2016 exhibition that I could curate at La Stanza del Vetro on the Isola di San Giorgio. It's the exhibition The Glass of the Architects, Vienna 1900 to 1937, an exhibition we could also bring to Corning, which connects us with Carol also. The idea of this exhibition was to focus on a period of glass making that was crucial for Vienna, because in this period many aspects of supporting glass making fell together in place, because on the one hand, there was a big step taken forward in the glass industry due to the new teaching in the special schools of glass making that were established in the northern Bohemian provinces of the monarchy. And these were very much supported by the School of Applied Arts that had been founded out of our museum. And this paved the way for a perfectly new form that was transported into glass making due to this generation of young designers, mostly architects who were trained at the school of Otto Wagner at the Academy of Arts in Vienna. And it was, we chose this topic together, David Landau and me, for the exhibition, because it was really a great experience to go back to this period and show it in Venice, which was quite a challenge because we had to bring glass from another glass region to the heart of glass, as Melania has called it. And I think the maestri, the Murano, they were quite suspicious in the beginning, but hopefully in the end they liked it. Maybe we can see the next slide, just to give you an impression of the masters we focused on. It's really interesting that in these years around 1900, all the important masters who were known nowadays as the masters of architecture in Vienna around 1900 also went into glass, because this was seen as the modern material, the new material that could be formed in any way. And it was an ideal combination of also state efforts to train young pupils in the schools of applied arts and in the glass schools, and they teamed up with these architects who really went to the furnaces. This was so important. What we know nowadays as studio glass already happened in around 1900 with people like Leopold Bauer and Koloman Moser and Joseph Hoffman joining glass makers really in front of the furnace. This was the message, and we were lucky that Carol who came to, I think you saw it in Venice and in Vienna, and that they decided to take over the exhibition. So for me, an ideal experience to also have this exhibition traveling. So I think this is for me was an important experience to see that you can make glass work for the public nowadays.
One thing we'll come back to later on, I hope, is the idea of exhibition design, or at least display design, and the balance between perhaps trying to create something theatrical, which it looks like was created here, and the focus on the object. But I also want, after we've spoken, after Caroline has talked about her image, to think a little bit more as well about that relation in the field of glass between the world of manufacture, commerce, and the history of glass collecting for museums. It strikes me that that's a very fertile subject to discuss, both in the context of Murano, the V&A, and other collections indeed. Caroline, we're going to move on to your slide, if Eleanor can change it. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here as well. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Camilla, and Melania as well. So the V&A glass collection covers almost 4,000 years of glass making. And what I wanted to do today is show one of our newest acquisitions, which is not yet even on display. And it was acquired just before lockdown by our head curator for ceramics and glass, Reinhardt. And when I was thinking about what object to pick, this immediately came to mind. Yes, in one sense, it is very much a typical vessel, a drinking vessel, glass, and maybe something we think of when we think about historic glass. But I think when you look closely, it really lends itself to a wider social and cultural context. And I think it can help us rethink what glass can be for the museum in 2020 and moving on. So this is known as a glass of friendship. It's a wheel engraved lead glass from the Netherlands, dating to about 1735, 1750. And it has a very special hidden message of forbidden love. So you can probably just about make out part of an engraved inscription that is in Dutch, and it stands for David and Jonathan. And it's looking to and based on the story from the Old Testament from Samuel of David, of course, David and Goliath, the handsome shepherd boy who was anointed by the prophet Samuel to become the future king of the Israelites, as King Saul had fallen out of grace of God. And David is summoned to the court where he ends up slaying the giant Goliath. With his slingshot, he becomes this very famous, successful soldier, and he meets King Saul's son, Jonathan, and the two men form a very strong bond. And there's stories of this idea that Saul is increasingly jealous. He hurls a spear at David, and in the end, David has to flee the court. And what we're actually seeing here is this farewell scene between David and Jonathan. And as it's written, is that they kissed one another and they wept together, but David more so. And I think the scene here, this departure between David and Jonathan, is also depicted on several Dutch 18th century glasses. And of course, in 18th century Netherlands, it was customary to make special toasts using glasses with engraved scenes and mottos that were often appropriate to the occasion. And historic evidence strongly suggests that depictions of Jonathan and David on drinking glasses would have been used to convey a secret message alluding to homosexual or same-sex love. And of course, at the time in the Netherlands was the huge rise of homophobia. This was a penalty of death, essentially. So this was a way of them secretly declaring their love in potentially very public setting in a toast. And I think today for us, for our ceramics and glass collections at the V&A, we have surprisingly few objects that have a sort of wider LGBTQ interest. And for me, I think this object, it adds to our museum interpretation, but it also illustrates the fact that such a historic, seemingly ordinary 18th century piece of glassware, which is beautifully embellished, can have this very hidden, secretive message of a couple celebrating their love, whilst also trying to safeguard themselves from horrendous prosecution, which I think is sadly something that still happens so many places today. So for me, I think it really emphasizes the relevance of glass and the role that we as museum curators can actually play in expanding our understanding of the past through these wonderful objects. So I'll just leave that there, but thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Caroline. That's a fascinating object, and I look forward to seeing it on display when the glass galleries are open and when it's installed in them. Eleanor, if we could take the slides off now. I'm going to continue the conversation. One thing that I think is fascinating about that object is it plays around in my head often this line from George Orwell, good prose is like a window pane, which is to say that the idea of clean writing is like a piece of glass that you can see straight through it. But of course, one of the things about glass is that many of its qualities are the qualities of its secrecy, or of the marks of the body and the breath inside it. And that's something too, the ways that one might be able to read the different striations, markings, and so on against the transparency of the material, and how a museum might help to interpret those things. Let's go back to that point about the, as it were, commercial aspect of collecting glass and the sense in which glass collections might historically have been, as it were, built to encourage good design, I suppose, in the way that a museum like the South Kensington Museum, which became the V&A, would have done. Carol, can you just give us a bit of a sense of how long museums have been specifically collecting glass for, and what the oldest museum glass collections are?
Well, in America, certainly, as museums were being formed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, if they were encyclopedic, if that was their intent, then glass was an element, particularly ancient glass, because it had much more visibility as a material than glass of later periods had, which might have been considered still industrial, if you will, unless they were an engraved Dutch goblet or something like that. So it really depends on the nature of the institution being founded and the founders as well, and what their interests were. But certainly amongst the decorative arts, glass was always recognized as a very important element to be representing all the materials that were being used in design, in industrial practice, and in daily life, really.
I suppose that's probably the case in Murano as well. The Museo del Vetro, as first established, is late 19th century. In that sense of at that point of one of the revivals of Murano glassmaking.
Exactly. Yeah, really. My understanding of the collection of that particular museum is that those objects were assembled to inspire and enable the maestri who were working there to innovate in what they were doing, to rediscover past practices, but then to use those as a springboard to create new designs and new interpretations of glass.
And Reinhardt, in somewhere like Mac, where of course there's this long history. I mean, it's the same with the Corning. The Corning itself, it is founded really to be quite close to the Corning glassworks, even though it is independent as a museum. But of course, at Mac, there's a very strong collection of Lobmeyer, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And that's very interesting for me, that in this particular field, there seems always to have been quite a close interrelation between the museum and the manufacturer.
Yes. I mean, the relation with Lobmeyer goes back actually to the founding of our museum, which was founded in 1864. And of course, this connects us with Caroline and the former South Kensington, today's V&A, because our former Museum of Art and Industry museum, because there was the idea to foster the art industry in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and this also formed the collection. And already in the beginning, there were close relations. Our founding director, Rudolf von Eitelberger, was also in personal relation. He was friends, and they kept exchanging glasses. There are these nice stories that the local collection and made also their forms according to these models. And
Reinhardt,
we hope in most cases the historic glasses came back to the collection.
Reinhardt, your line isn't that great, so I'm just going to move away from you for now, in the hope that it will improve it a little bit later on. I would love for us to talk about the historical sort of taxonomy of glass in the museum. We could do a whole hour on that or more, obviously. So I'm going to zoom forward to the present day and think. Perhaps I'll ask you, Caroline. I was deliberately a bit provocative in my introduction about this idea that glass perhaps is somehow a type of material that can be seen in certain contexts as quite a fusty object and group of objects. Do you think there's something you know, glass is something we all use, or most of us use every day. We have it in our windows, we drink out of it, some of us even drink our coffee out of it. It's rather odd that perhaps sometimes it could seem that glass in museums is such a rarefied object when it's so ubiquitous everywhere else in our lives.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I think something that's so appealing about glass as a material is that it does filter into the everyday, yet historically, so often we are focused on that top 3-5% of the aristocracy and their consumption and production of glass. So I think that's an element that perhaps lends itself to not people believing it's maybe more rarefied than it actually is. I think for the V&A, as soon as you walk into the entrance hall off Cromwell Road for us and you look up, you have this wow factor of the Dale Shahuli chandelier towering above you. I mean, it's almost 30 feet. It's got 1,400 individual glass blown pieces. I mean, gorgeous colors of green and blue and yellow. And for me, as a visitor and as a curator in the museum, when you walk in, glass hits you in the face if you let it. And then I think it's trying to encourage the visitors to think, okay, well, great, there's the glass. Let's go find the glass galleries and immerse myself more. But I think it's maybe trying to connect that process a bit more. But certainly when you walk in, glass is very much in the fabric of the very building itself in South Kensington.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, I think this is true of Reinhardt as well, but of course your title holds together ceramics and glass, perhaps rather than glass and ceramics, but let's say it's because they're in alphabetical order rather than some sort of hierarchy. And I just wondered whether you felt, I'll start with Caroline and then we'll come to you, Reinhardt, because hopefully the line will be better now.
Yeah.
You know, is that for you, that's a very natural pairing to be a curator in charge of those two fields, or is that a useful pairing for you, or is it quite an arbitrary one simply because there are so many vessels in both fields?
That's a really great question. I think it makes absolute sense. And I think even today, when you look at training, I mean, one of the best courses with the masters in ceramics and glass at the Royal College of Art, it's bringing both materials together. And I think there are quite a lot of, in terms of contemporary practice, artists that do look at both mediums and materials, particularly those working in kind of more sculptural means. So I think it's something that lends itself quite well. And actually, in some ways, ceramics is very similar in the sense of trying to get people excited about an object that actually, a type of material that is everywhere. And for me, much more accessible than a fine painting and much more tangible. You can actually touch these objects. There's a sensory engagement that I think allows their different textures to glisten under candlelight or whatever it may be, that I think can bring these objects to life. And for me, so that's something that I think ceramics and glass collections can do equally as well.
And Reinhardt, if I can ask you before I move back to Carol with a question, one of the things that interests me about Mac is those historical artist interventions by people like Donald Judd and others, which incorporate glass. Can you say a little bit about how, in the artist interventions and the Franz Graf one as well, the role of glass and how that might make us rethink glass as a material, having those artists involved?
Yeah, it's interesting that you know, these artist rooms that still exist today, they were the outcome of a reshaping and refurbishing of the museum, which already happened in the early 1990s. And for us, many of these rooms still work today because the idea was to bring together curators from the museum with contemporary artists, designers, architects, and take a closer look at different periods of the development of the decorative arts. And glass was an important issue in this field because, as you mentioned, the room that was designed together with the Austrian artist Franz Graf, he focused on the relation of glass as a luxury material with the collection from the textile collection of laces. And this is something that we also find in Venice, of course, the Merletti and the glass, the two luxury industries that are also still based in Venice today. And I think this is something we all have to bear in mind. Caroline focused on the relations between ceramics and glass. Of course, they are all these materials come out of the fire, and they were really luxury materials in their period. For example, chandeliers, mirrors, these were the most expensive pieces of that were used in the decoration of palaces and imperial houses. So this, I think Franz Graf managed very well, if you have a chance to see the room, to combine these two materials that were luxury materials in their period, that were traded profusely already in the 16th, 17th century all over the world. And he also managed to focus on the graphic roots that stand for both of these materials. They both come, their forms come out of design in the beginning. And this was, I think, this as he is a graphic artist, this interested him most. And I think the room still works today.
Caroline, I think you should retitle yourself as curator of objects from the fire.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's a great title for a job. Carol, let's move to you. I understand obviously the role of glass museums, and obviously glass museums wouldn't exist if they didn't fundamentally believe in their mission to make glass relevant and that it was widely relevant and so on. But I wonder for you, looking at more decorative or applied arts museums and indeed encyclopedic museums, whether you sometimes feel wherever you are in the world that they could make more of their glass collections.
Oh, that goes without saying. I absolutely believe that. I, like you, Tom, have wandered many hallways looking for the glass collections and wondering where they are when you see silver and ceramic and other materials so forward. But I have to say, Caroline and Reinhold, you're kind of anomalies in the curatorial world, because the challenge that I've encountered as a glass specialist working with colleagues in different museums is that often in the curriculum, in the training, glass is just not present. So part of that simply has to do with a lack of knowledge or a fear of a lack of knowledge, not wanting to work with a glass collection because you don't feel like you have the expertise to do it as a curator. So one of the things that we try to do as a museum that is focused on glass is to be that partner for colleagues in other institutions, to lend a hand when we can, to provide resources when we can, and hopefully in so doing, working to promote those collections forward so that they sit side by side with objects of other materials. So our long-term goal, it's part of our mission here.
Let's move on to something that you implied there. I mean, there's something about a lack of, we're talking about potentially a lack of training in the art historical degrees and curatorial training. But of course, one of the challenges here is the in the public facing side of things is what might be the discrepancy between the object itself, which may seem very pristine, beautiful, transparent, all of these things that what one might associate with glass, and types of information about the object. It's something that is specific not only to glass, but I feel like it has specific applications when it comes to thinking about glass. So To begin with, I wanted to ask about, and I think Carol, you're the best person to ask first about this. You know, what are some of the best ways to think about process and making and the properties of materials? Huge questions that you you have a whole museum dedicated to, but in museums, and how central should those things be to museum displays of glass?
Well, from my perspective as a former curator, it was certainly one of the things that I was most interested in understanding was, how was this made? What was the process used to do that? And here in Corning, we answer that question for our visitors in a number of different ways. We offer live daily demonstrations of glassmaking. Sitting there and watching someone create a work of art, a functional object in glass, answers so many questions for you as a preparatory exercise before going into the galleries. Because once you can see how glass can be manipulated, understand the tools, understand the material, the temperatures, all of that, it makes the gallery experience when you're looking at the object so much more enjoyable. Now, not every museum has a team of glass artists working for them who can undertake daily demonstrations. And we have provided videos of glass making to museums around the world for free. And so it's not surprising to me to walk into a gallery and see a video doing the same kind of demonstration for a visitor that we do live here in Corning. You know, that kind of demonstration of technique takes the place of about 2,000 words on a wall. So it's a much nicer way to get engaged with the material that you're not going to encounter as an average person. It's not painting. It's not even throwing a pot on a wheel. It's a material that is much more removed from our daily experience. So sharing that excitement, sharing that skill that's needed is really a wonderful gateway drug to get people addicted to this material.
I think that's so interesting that you use it as a type of, you know, here's your in-flight video before you take off. It's your briefing rather than perhaps something that might come after. I suppose at somewhere like the V&A, the arrangement of the collections is slightly different insofar as you might have a room with some, as it were, really glitzy pieces of contemporary glass and larger scale works. And then I think it's room 131. I did look it up before. I don't know every single room of the V&A off the top of my head, but you have more of a sense of, you know, a chronological history, a study collection, and some technical material. Do you think, Caroline, that the V&A, I mean, I know you've only recently started there, but could do a bit more with process?
I think process is so key. And I think you mentioned it towards the start, Tom, this idea of performance that comes when you actually see glass being made. And it's that point of magic and almost alchemy where the material shifts. And I think the minute you explain that to someone, I teach master's students for the V&A and the RCA, and the minute you explain how the material process works, there's suddenly a different type of interest. It's like I think it's a very good analysis of an in-flight movie. And I do think videos are absolutely the way, one of the ways to do that. So our glass galleries, the historic glass galleries, were done in 1994. And then about 10 years later, the contemporary glass display, which we do change quite regularly, that was put together. So I think there's definitely room for asking ourselves, how do we show these processes? With ceramics, we have an artist in residence, but we do not have that type of facility for glass. But don't think that means to say we can't try and find other options for showing that process and really getting people excited. And actually, it's very interesting in terms of the public face of glass and glass making. And I've been really struck recently by the new Netflix series, Blown Away. We're not so new anymore. And it was wonderful, Carol, to see Deb's work so prominently featured in that exhibition of yours. And I think programs like that actually are can do a much better job very quickly, because suddenly my husband was so interested in all this glass and the hotness of the hot shop and everything, and the furnaces and the fire. And the minute you see something like that, I think actually you go, oh, right, I want to go in and see these objects in person in the museum and understand them a bit more. So I think we definitely have things to learn from each other moving forward.
I suppose the other thing that happens there is that, moving slightly on to the question of social history, but actually, first of all, a question of the history of artists. Obviously, Reinhardt, your the Glass of the Architects exhibition picked up on names who are already, at least in certain circles, quite familiar. They're important architects, in the same way that some of the people who worked with Venini, an exhibition on Scarpa is kind of about Scarpa and his interactions with the furnaces. How far can the sense of actual makers and historic makers, rather than the designers who may have later in the 20th century come into the furnaces, be something that that is there in museums, that is an object or a field of study for museums?
I think this is very important also due to this growing and I think in some ways also exploding interest and new interest into crafts and making, because these are the fields that our museums are strong in. And I just can add to my experiences in Carol's museum. When you go to Corning, you even as an experienced glass expert, you learn a lot from the everyday performances and shows, and in the hot shop and in the amphitheater, and there are so many ways to learn from. And I think this is the big thing that our museums can offer. You have on the one side the aesthetic quality of the material that we so much appreciate, and on the other hand there is this quality of being able to show to people how these pieces came into being, and raising by this the appreciation of the objects. And we have these pattern collections in our field. For example, we have a marvelous collection of Lutz glass pattern pieces, where you really can see how these completely new techniques were developing. And I think this is something for the future that we can really give to the public in many levels and in many different media. Also, of course, the digital media are very important in this field, I would say, with the online videos like the Corning Museum is providing for the whole world, which have raised the understanding of historical glass and modern glass to such an extent.
Just extending this question of social history, and this is partly by way of plugging an exhibition coming up at the Corning next year. I know that both Carol and Caroline have next to them copies of a new edited volume. Is it called In Sparkling Company? Which is published by Yale University Press, is that correct? Or perhaps Paul Mellon Center, I don't know. But the question really is, this is a collection of writings that relates to an exhibition that I believe is going to do quite a lot to think about how glass objects might be situated more in terms of histories of trade, the history of slavery, histories of exploitation. And I wonder whether, since it's coming to the Corning, I'll ask you first, Carol, whether you feel that to a certain degree, maybe people researching glass have slightly lagged behind on thinking about some of these very important questions as to the implications, connotations, secrets, as it were, of the material in its historical context.
Perhaps they have. I wouldn't say that's a given, though. I think it's prevalent writ large in the field. Everyone is now turning their attention to many narratives, many social histories, many overlooked interpretive approaches that we must focus on now. And Caroline, I really thank you for selecting that goblet as a case in point. We acquired a piece last year that's very much like that for exactly that reason. And In Sparkling Company is a fabulous show because through the material of glass, you are looking at 18th century Britain through a number of different lenses, from where you are in the pecking order of the aristocracy, what your house looks like. Can you afford scientific instruments to pursue your interests in the microscopic and the macroscopic world? And then really important to the conversation here, and particularly in America today with the Black Lives Matter resurgence and strong movement. What is the role of glass in the trade of humans, in the slave trade from Africa to the Caribbean? And how is that reflected in glass? And it is in many different ways, whether it's beads, whether it's vessels that are designed specifically to hold sugar that is coming from sugarcane production or rum, all of these commodities. So it's one example of a period in time in which we can use this singular material and really take a snapshot of society at that time. We could do it for many, many other periods. And it gives me the opportunity to say that with our permanent collection, our curators have now new titles, new reassigned roles that are both chronological but also global, so that their purview is not isolated to Europe or America or the ancient world. They're really working globally now because our goal is to reinstall our permanent collection using a similar approach that we've done within Sparkling Company. So it's a long-term project, but we are on our way. And Caroline, this is In Sparkling Company is exactly your period, so you really know the details around this.
Yes, and of course I know Kit Maxwell, who put the exhibition and the book together, and I think exactly what you said, I think it's so important. And I think at the moment, all museums across the world are really starting to think about, given the current circumstances, and particularly in relation to Black Lives Matter, what do we need to say and how do we need to reinterpret these objects and make sure that we do it properly, I think is a key thing. And in particular in Sparkling Company, there's a fantastic chapter written by historian Kerry Sinanan, and it deals just very, very well and articulates very clearly, looking at, in particular, the slave trade glass beads and their role, explicit role as currency for human life, and what that means, and how we address that in a gallery setting where typically an audience is going to potentially look at the aesthetic value or the aesthetic quality of the object, and how do we reframe that. And I'll be so excited to see what you do with your permanent collection, very eager to learn, because I think it's really about collaborating together to make sure that we are reframing those stories as best as we can for the future moving forward. And I think a global understanding is such a key way of bringing glass into the wider study as well of museums and art history as a whole.
I think this is a good continuation of something that has been done already in the field of ceramics, because if we go to the topics of the trade of China, there are many examples. For example, the Ashmolean Museum has done this in a perfect way to approach this topic of the relations between really slavery-like working conditions in Japan and China with the East India Company and so on. And I think it's very important to also focus on this topic in the field of glass, and it's great that Kate has taken up this topic. We were discussing about it last year when we met in Groningen.
Does this? I mean, would you say that current rightful current preoccupations will affect collecting policies at this point? What are the real priorities for museums acquiring glass right now, Carol?
Well, at Corning, it's really taking that deep dive to understand what we have. We're fortunate to be able to get external funding through foundations, for example, to bring in experts to help us understand lost and forgotten parts of the collection, to elevate them within our displays, but also to, I'm sorry, that's the factory whistle blowing in the background.
Well,
a remnant of a factory town. Well, so in a nutshell, all of the curators have been working on collection overviews for years, and we've consistently identified gaps in our collection that really need to be addressed because the focus has been on Europe and America. So not indigenous peoples or anything like that. So we need to regain knowledge about our collections because we have forgotten masterpieces in our Asian glass collection, for example. And then take a focused approach. And in the contemporary field, we've been focusing on women for many years, and now it's Black, Indigenous people of color that are in the forefront of our contemporary collecting practice.
Listen, I take it that the factory whistle blowing is blowing for presumably midday where you are.
Yes.
But that also marks, I think, 5 p.m. where I am and 6 p.m. in Venice, which I'm afraid brings us to the end of what I've found a really fascinating discussion. I'm afraid what you can hear there is not a factory whistle, but someone drilling in the flat above my head. So that in itself is cause for concern. Before I hand back to Camilla, let me just say thank you so much to Reinhold, to Carol, and to Caroline. This was a fascinating thing, and I hope that we can reprise it in some form in IRL, they say, at some point soon.
Thank you for having us.
And IRL, and hopefully, ideally, in Venice as well. Thank you all so much, genuinely, for the most fascinating and thought-provoking, enlightening conversation. Tom, you are a veteran of the panel discussion world, I know, but you genuinely moderated so brilliantly. Your questions were so superb and thoughtful, and really prompted a really wonderful conversation. And thank you to all of our speakers, all of you extremely eminent, Caroline, Carol, and Reinhold. I know that you're in very, very busy roles, and so we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, to share your different perspectives about how your individual museums, but also how you personally are really striving to make glass matter increasingly to the museum going public. It's so interesting to hear about how all the different approaches that you're taking, and also extremely exciting to hear about some of the plans and ambitions you've got for your own museums as well. And I'm sure all of us listening today really look forward to being able to visit in person very soon, hopefully. Thank you so much to Melania for joining us on Apice today. We are really grateful to Apice for facilitating the programme of online conversations this year, which obviously is allowing us to open up the festival to those who sadly aren't able to join us in person. As I said, today's the fourth in our conversation programme. Tomorrow we've got another topic which I think will be of interest to all of you speakers and Tom, as well as probably most of you who are listening as well today. It's on the topic of Venice and American studio glass, and it's specifically relating to the blockbuster exhibition that's just opened this week at Le Stanze del Vetro. So that's on Friday the 11th at 5 p.m. Italian time. And we've got the co-curators of the show, so Tina Oldknow and William Warmish, as well as three artists who are exhibiting, Dan Daly, Nancy Callan and Benjamin Moore, as well as David Landau himself, who is the trustee of Pentagram Stiftung, which is the foundation that, together with the Cini Foundation, is responsible for the incredible Stanze del Vetro. He's also the founder of the Venice Glass Week, so it's set to be another extremely interesting conversation. But for now, obviously, I'd like to say again a huge thank you to you all, Tom, Caroline, Carol, Reinhardt, as well as Melania, and to everyone who's been watching at home, and to those who will be watching in due course. This conversation will remain permanently on the Venice Glass Week YouTube channel, so do enjoy, along with the other conversations in the programme, and hope very much that we'll see all of you at our next appointment tomorrow, Friday at 5 p.m. But also to our speakers and moderator, Tom, really hope that we can see you all in Venice before too long too. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Arrivederci.
Thank you.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.